Alrighty, hey gang, welcome back. Another episode of Stove Chat. Happy Wednesday. We're here for episode 37 and a half. So that was a power outage, and I neglected to tell you guys that Shack Life time here, Shack Life moment. Power doesn't always stay on, apparently. No, so I actually didn't even know if we were going to be able to do this today because it has been so stormy here. We've been getting inches of rain a day for weeks on end, it seems like. That's maybe an exaggeration a little bit, but not really. I think we got a couple inches yesterday and a couple inches a few days ago and all that. And then last night was crazy windy and crazy rainy, and my power went out for quite a while. I heard a transformer blow across the street, and then it came back on, and then it went back out for quite a while, and then I went to bed, and I don't know what it did overnight, but I woke up wondering if I was going to be able to do the show, if I was going to have power. It's pretty nice and sunny outside. The wind's gone. I was like, okay, it's probably pretty good. I know there's a lot of trees down everywhere, but I think PUD just went and fixed that transformer right when I started my stream. So that was the power going out and everything in here shutting down and me panicking. And I apologize, you guys. Oh my gosh. What? Just classic, right? Classic for my streams. So anyways, now I'm really discombobulated, but hopefully most of you guys made it back. I don't know if there's a way for someone to go tell people in the other stream. I don't know if we can still comment over there that I started a new one. I wasn't able to just pick up that old one. It had been closed long enough that it shut down. But anyways, we'll see if this works. It looks like the stream itself is having issues, but we'll just dive back in and I'll try again. I'm so sorry, you guys. Anyways, Happy New Year. Hey, Pete, nice to see you. Great to have you here. I'm not sure what's going on with my internet. It looks like it's not doing great. We'll just try anyways. I think that when the power went out, my cell booster is probably rebooted. So we might have issues here. Darn it, you guys, I'm so sorry. All right. Well, I don't know if it's working for you guys. Is the stream working for you guys? Is it just bad on my end? I'm getting a lot of pausing, it looks like. Anyways, I'll just move on. So we were talking about secondary and primary air, and the question was, is it necessary to have both? And the answer to that question is that really it depends on your goals and your build. So here's the thing. We started this whole rocket stove movement from a really simple space where we said our goal is to build the most efficient wood stoves possible. Yeah, Mark, I hope so too. Okay, Tall Shadow stream's good. Thank you very much. That helps me. Because I'm sending it out and then it's trying to come back to me too, and so when I look at the playback, it's all messed up, and I can't tell if that's just my return or the send. Anyways, going back to secondary and primary air. So the deal is we started with rocket stoves as a means to build super efficient wood burning stoves with very minimal materials and very simplistic design so that anyone could do it using kind of what they had on hand. So the original rocket stove or rocket mass heater is a J-tube, and in a J-tube, no, there's no need for secondary air. That's one of the primary strengths of the J-tube is its simplicity and its cleanliness and efficiency. It can burn at a cleanliness that's really unrivaled by any other combustion chamber that I know of, combustion design that I know of, with regards to simplicity. I mean, what I'm trying to say is there's no simpler burner that burns anywhere nearly as clean. And in most situations, to get something that burns as cleanly, you need to start adding complexity, things like secondary air or catalytic converters. And so the J-tube, as the original rocket stove burner, obviously needs no secondary air, and so that's the way to build an efficient, clean rocket mass heater with no secondary air and to build it the simplest way possible. However, we've now, we now have alternatives. We have the batch box rocket mass heaters, which feature doors and, different fuel configuration. So they offer some other advantages. You can use larger fuel, you can walk away for a little bit longer, things like that. But in order to get those advantages, the design gets a little more complex. And in a batch box type rocket mass heater with a door and a closed burn chamber, you do need secondary air if efficient and clean combustion is your priority. So, in other words, we talk about rocket mass heaters as if the goals are understood, and that is that the goal is to be as efficient and clean as possible, top priority, right? So if that is the top priority, and that is, the reason you're building a rocket mass heater, which for most of us it is, then yeah, you do need secondary air if you want a batch box, or you can build a J-tube without it. So hopefully that answers that question. I think that was the nature, I hope that was the intention of your question. That was really what I was going for. So Belgian Gulch made it back. I hope we get some others who make it back. I really apologize for that. So if you missed the explanation, that was my power going out. We've been in a full-on winter storm onslaught for weeks now, and last night was major trees, inches of rain down in the days prior, and then tons of wind last night. My power was out, on and off all night last night. I wondered if we would do this today. I heard transformers blowing up. And so I think that just now when I started that new stream, I think the county came out and started working on fixing the lines. So hopefully they'll keep the power up for a little while. So anyways, let's move on. So that was the question about secondary air. So the next question I got, and I believe this question is from Rich Points, if I remember correctly, but it's been about a month since the question came in, so I don't recall if that's correct. So I apologize if that's incorrect. But the question was about barrels on rocket mass heaters and the longevity of metal in that location, like a radiator type location. And so any of you guys that have experience with rocket mass heaters for yourselves in your own homes, feel free to chime in here. It's one of the it's not a mystery. It's one of the sort of compelling. It's such an interesting thing about rocket mass heaters is that metal is doomed. Any metal in the combustion core won't last. That's true, with the exception of our new wonderful RA330. But then we just go ahead and stick a barrel over the top of it and call it good. And, we have a lot of people who come to rocket mass heaters for their first time, especially J-tubes with barrels, and they see that and they say, what gives? You guys just told me we can't use metal. It's going to eat metal. And now you've got a barrel. Should I, which one do I trust? And so it's a really common question. How long do the barrels last? Is there any danger? Things like that. So anyone who has had a rocket mass heater in their home for any amount of time knows that it's not very long after having that rocket mass heater where you were like, dang, that barrel gets hot. Is that really gonna be okay? Because it'll get just cherry red hot and you'll be wondering about how long it's gonna last. As it turns out, once you've had it in there for a couple years, you know that it gets cherry hot, cherry red all the time, and it's fine. And it's totally holding up fine. So the answer is that I have not yet seen a barrel deteriorate on a rocket mass heater to the point where you can't use it anymore due to the nature of the rocket mass heater. I've seen them left outside and start to rust and get thin. Excuse me for a second, you guys. Waylon, will you please stop chewing on that, okay? He's just chewing on his blanket and making noises. Go outside, bud. Go do something else. A barrel just on a rocket mass heater indoors, in my experience, that barrel is at no risk of deteriorating to the point where you can't use it anymore just through the nature of using that rocket mass heater. So why is that? Like, how can the core be so hot that it's melting metal, in a short matter of time, and yet the barrel can last indefinitely? And I think the answer, and this is mostly speculation, but it seems to hold true. There's been a lot of conversation, so it's not just my speculation. It's sort of, I think, the general consensus speculation. But the answer seems to be twofold. One is that the metal of the barrel is only exposed to the heat of the flames on one side, and the other side is exposed to your relatively cool room, and there's a high difference of temperature between the inside of the barrel and the outside of the barrel. So even though that barrel top is getting blasted by 700 or 800 degree flames, that metal on the other side is rapidly cooling. And so the metal itself is probably not really ever getting, well, it's certainly not exceeding that temperature of what's coming out of the riser, and it's probably always far cooler, to be honest. And I think that, at 700 or 800 degrees or whatever's coming out of the riser, that metal is fine. It's not starting to go away, at least in my experience. Now, the second part of that is, I think, even more important, and that is that in order for metal to break down in a combustion environment, part of what's happening is a chemical reaction of the carbon in the metal bonding, or wait, I might be getting that wrong, but anyways, there's carbon bonds going on between the gases, the oxygen, or actually just all the gases. So I don't know enough about this, actually. I'm stumbling right now because I didn't do my research in chemistry. And so don't quote me on this, but the gist of it is that basically what the gases that we're sending out of the firebox have had quite a bit of those volatiles consumed, right? We consumed the volatiles from the fuel, and they mix with the oxygen in the air, so we have a low oxygen, or I think it's low oxygen, high carbon, environment. And I could have that backwards, but at any rate, it's whatever the environment is that is coming out of the gases that come out of the riser or the rocket stove are not capable of stripping the material away from the steel. You're not able to make that molecular bond. So as Belgian Gold says, I'm still using the same barrel after 7 years of hard burning, and it is good as new. And that's been my experience too. And so, Rich, the answer to your question is that in my experience and in the experience of others, the barrels will last indefinitely in that location as a radiator. For those two reasons I listed, and perhaps others, and probably most importantly is just the plain temperature just doesn't get that hot. There's one little hot spot right above it, and it can dissipate out, and everything else is below the threshold of damaging it. And it just, they don't wear out, they don't deteriorate. So the answer is, go for it. Use them for as long as you want. In my experience, you won't develop pinholes or anything like that. You won't have any deterioration, and they'll come out sounding and being strong after years of use. So that's the barrels on the RMH. And Always Learning says, should you deflect the riser heat at its exit point in the barrel with a ceramic deflector? And no, Always Learning, I don't think you should. You can, if there's some reason for you to do that, like if you want more heat to come out of the face of the stove, you can. You can put that baffle up and have it blast that way, and you will get way more heat out of the front of the radiator than you would out of the top if you just left it open. But in terms of safety or protecting the metal, no, there's no reason to. It'll blast out of the riser, hit that metal. The metal will warp and kind of deform and turn cherry red. But I don't think it's going anywhere, so I don't think there's any need to. And if you want the heat right out of the top, then that's the best way to go. Now, you can insulate that top and push heat down and get heat out lower and out the sides. Those are good things in a lot of builds. Those might be goals that you'd have. So you certainly can deflect the heat down. And anyone who has any of my plans knows that that's a scheme that I use often in my plans to insulate upper areas to both allow us to use different materials and to push heat downstream into the body of the stove and really give us access to that mass that's down low in the body of the stove. It's kind of hard to access that part of your thermal battery unless you kind of force stuff down there. So sometimes that's a good reason to insulate up above, but there's no reason to for the barrel's safety. So there you go for that one. And so that brings us to our next question. And the next question is one I got via email. And it's one that we get a lot, and I think we may have talked about it, but we might as well go back over it. And it is cooktops and cooktop alternatives. So I often get the question, I prefer to use these ceramic glass salvaged stovetops for the tops of my stoves. I like to use that material because it's free if you can salvage it. It's really, really nice looking and easy to work with, it radiates heat into the room fantastically. It's like a heat window on top of that stove. So when your stove is burning, you just get really good heat extraction into the space via that piece of ceramic glass. It glows orange underneath. It's nice to look at, and it most importantly in all of those things, in my opinion, is that it doesn't change size or shape much. It probably does a little, but not any measurable amount with temperature differences. And that's really important because this thing is going through some crazy temperature extremes. 900, 1,000 degrees where the riser exits, we're blasting right onto it. And then over there at the start of your burn, you might be getting 800 degrees right on this piece of the glass right here. And over here, it's still 70 degrees or whatever it is in your house. So you get these huge deltas of temperature across the material. So the cooktop is kind of a tough piece of material to source. And I really like those ceramic glass tops because they do all those things and you can get them for free. It seems like it's a win-win-win-win-win-win-win. Now that can be kind of hard to find for free, and for a lot of people, it's just too much hassle to go find one, as I can attest with my broken one that I've had for a year there now. So what are some alternatives? I get this question a lot. What can I use if I don't want to use ceramic glass, or if I can't find ceramic glass? What are my alternatives? Well, my second best choice for ceramic glass is cast iron. And to go back to ceramic glass real quick, Permaculture Playground, I always stumble over your name, my friend, I'm sorry, says, can the ceramic glass tops be cut or does it shatter like tempered glass? No, it can be cut. It's actually, I don't think it's technically glass at all. I think it's all ceramic. I don't really know the chemical makeup, but it cuts very much like bricks. You can actually just use like a wet diamond saw or even a diamond blade on a grinder. And as long as you don't try and pierce it, as long as you do shallow scoring passes where you're removing the material with the diamond and you're not putting any pressure on it. You're not trying to cut down with any pressure. You're just kind of removing a groove until it goes all the way through. It actually cuts beautifully. It's really easy to work with. And it's another one of the reasons I love it is because it's simple to work with. It's all those things I said. So I really enjoy it. Now there's a couple different kinds of ceramic glass. There's clear ceramic glass, which is thicker, usually called Robax. It usually has like an orange or a green tint, depending on which brand you get. I think Robax is green, and there's another one that's orange. I might have that backwards. But they're usually kind of thick and they're smooth and they're pretty clear. But the ceramic glass you get on the cooktops is usually something else. It's usually, the brand I've seen is Ceram. It's a shot product, just like the Robax is. So it must be a different product. It's usually far thinner than the Robax, the Robax you'll find in like doors for windows, fireplace doors, where this cooktop glass is different. It's thinner, and it usually is opaque, and it usually has bumps on one side. I kind of like the bumps. I feel like they're, the flue gases are sort of being like golf ball, like broken up along there, and you're getting really even temperature distribution and good flow. But I don't know if that's true. But at any rate, I really like that glass. But you can use either of those glasses successfully for a top, and I have at Paul's place in Montana, Peter Vandenberg and I, when we built the first 8-inch batch box rocket mass heater, we used a large piece of the thick Robax type glass on top of the firebox and used it as a cooktop. It works great. It works just fine. It's really nice to look through there. It's crystal clear, but it's usually more expensive and harder to find than those cooktops. So yeah, you can cut that stuff just great. And so that's another thing, if you're building a cook stove and you don't want that top to be as large, maybe you want less heat coming into the space off the radiator and more heat going into the mass, or maybe you have a big water coil and you're interested more in pushing heat downstream to the water feature, but you just need a single burner. That's a great trick to cut down that ceramic glass stove to a much smaller cooktop. Use ceramic fiberboard to cap the top of the stove where you need to. Just cut out a window for that glass to lay on in that ceramic fiberboard, and in that way you can create a cooktop of any size on top of these your stove body. So it could be all ceramic fiberboard on top, a window to open, let the heat up to your ceramic glass, your small piece of ceramic glass on top of the fiberboard, and then whatever your countertop material is on top of that ceramic fiberboard everywhere else. It could be tile, it could be stone, it could be brick, whatever you use there. So it's a really great way to finish things. So back to cooktop materials. So my second cooktop material choice is cast iron. And the reason for that is for a lot of the same reasons as the glass. It's usually able to be found salvage. It's fairly inexpensive. It's incredibly durable. You can't work with it as easily. You probably won't be able to cut it if you don't find a piece you like. I mean, you can, but it's such a pain in the butt. You just want to use what you find. But it's possible to find all different sizes. You know, if you just want a little griddle, you can just go find a little griddle. If you want a huge cooktop, you can go find a flat top at a restaurant supply store. You know, kick around in the back, ask them if they have any dead ones, if they have any old tops, things like that. Metal salvage yards are great places to look for that. Old wood-burning, other old inefficient wood-burning kitchen stoves usually have a whole beautiful cast iron top with removable eyes and things like that. Those are beautiful cooktops for these types of stoves. Small wood stoves, like box stoves, like there's a little Joe Tool that has just a 2-burner cooktop on top made of cast iron. And last but not least, even just a cast iron griddle, like a large camp griddle. You can install that right in your stove as your cooktop, and that'll work great. Now, I bring up that cast iron and that alternative cooktop because one of the questions I get a lot is, can I use steel? And so this is really my way of trying to discourage you from using steel in that cooktop location. And the reason is simply because of the way it's going to deal with the temperature changes and the delta, the difference in temperature across its plane. Being that it'll be 900 degrees here in 5 minutes after lighting and still 70 degrees over there, what happens is they just warp incredibly dramatically. It's actually surprising to see how much you can misshape a heavy-duty piece of steel with just a little heat from a rocket stove. And what happens is that makes it almost impossible to seal around the edges. You know, it's just going to be weeble-wobbling on top of your stove. So it makes it almost unusable. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is people end up thinking, oh, well, if I use thick enough steel, it'll be better. And actually thicker the steel, I mean, I'm sure there's a limit. Maybe if you had like an inch thick steel, it'd be fine. But as you get into the 1/4 inch and, you know, heavier steel gauges, it actually gets worse because as it just, you know, moves out of shape, you can't correct it. So I actually think if you want to use steel, you're better off using thin, like 12 gauge steel, just like the top of a barrel, where it can bend all over the place, but you can still, you know, clamp the edges down with something and hold the seal there. So that's the cooktop discussion for the most part. You know, really what it comes down to is, in my opinion, you for the most part have 2 good options. You've got the ceramic glass and cast iron. Any other metal on top of there, I just really think you're going to have a problem with warping and stuff. So Permaculture Playground adds great experience to this discussion. He says, I have a 1/2 inch thick steel plate that's 20 inches by 20 inches. So it's not really even that big. You know, this is what we're talking about. And he says, and it did warp quite a bit. I mean, that's a significant piece of metal. A 1/2 inch piece of steel, and with only a 20 inch span across it, you would think it would take an enormous amount of energy to warp that. But as it turns out, these stoves will do it easily. And as I'm sure you found out, Permaculture Playground, it's really difficult to use the cooktop once it's started to deform like that. And so it kind of just, you know, I get these questions a lot. I understand that steel is really common. I know what you're thinking. You're like, I could weld some angle iron to the bottom of it and make it work. And my question to you, and this isn't directed at anyone specifically, please don't get this wrong, is like, why? Why bother to go through all that trouble when you could, I mean, a cast iron, you know, brand new from Amazon, a cast iron skillet that you could use as a beautiful cooktop is like $60 or something. So, you know, I really think that that every time I get that question, you know, I come back really strongly and say, you know, I really strongly recommend that you try and find something other than steel. I know you have it. I know it seems convenient and easy, but I think down the road you'll be happy you chose something else. So that's alternative cooktops, and that's really my covering on that. I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any other options. I would like to give a shout out to our friend Short Bus Life with the awesome chicken and bus with his cook stove in his bus, because he had that really nice cooktop surface that he built using it looked like a cast like a manhole cover, and I just thought it was a really cool alternative source of cast things. I just listed a whole bunch of cast things that come from the world of cooking, but he found something that was a cast iron piece from a whole different use, and put it to use in his stove, and it came out really neat. So I thought that was really cool. So Permaculture Playground says, I mostly use it as an oven with a ceramic dome on top of it. Yeah, that's a great way to go for sure. And I'm not picking on you on the steel, don't get me wrong. I only know this because I tried to use steel tops myself for so many years and in so many different builds. And my cook stove down in the big house there still has a couple little pieces of steel on it. You can make it work in the right place, but it's just one of those things that over time I've learned it's just not worth fighting that fight if you can avoid it, in my opinion. So that's what we're here for, to make these builds better and easier. So, okay, so I got another email that I'd like to go over. It's got a bunch of great questions. They're really specific to this one particular build that this customer is going through. But he did such a good job. He sent photos and great questions. I think they'll be really illustrative to us. So I think we should try and go through it, and I'll do my best to get through them. Some of it's a little complex, but we'll see if we can do it. So, and Tall Shadow says, I would imagine you really lose a lot of surface contact with the pot pan when the steel warps, and we didn't even get into that part of it, Tall Shadow. I just talked about the seal and how tough it was. But yeah, the biggest part of it, or not, but one of the big parts of the steel is that as soon as it starts warping, it becomes really poor cooking surface because of those warps. So yeah, it's just, there's a whole host of reasons why it's best to avoid it. And Permaculture Playground says, I only used it because I couldn't find ceramic glass that size, but I'll try and find a bigger one now that I know I can cut it. Yeah, man, it's all good. And using steel is fine. I mean, live and learn, right? Like, I'm sure you've been making it work. And I do think that, this conversation, like, if someone is listening and they're building a stove in their shop and they've got a piece of steel sitting right next to the stove that they've just had sitting there, it's like, use it, try it. I mean, it's free, you got it. Like, but if you're out there buying parts and stuff, just know that you'll probably eventually end up wanting something to finish that other than that. So I'm not picking on anyone for using steel by any means. So hey, let's get into this other email. This is a really, really cool email. This is from Peter in France. Peter, I want to say thank you very much for your patience and your excellent details in these questions. I'll do my best to answer them. It might be a little tough, but I'm going to try. So let's see if I can click us over to photos here. And what we're going to look at first is we're going to look at sort of his idea of 4 different designs. And there's some things in here that we're going to have to talk about how to change. I don't know if you can see my mouse. You can't. It doesn't look like. Oh, wait. Maybe you can if I go here. No, it doesn't look like you can. But at any rate, in the foreground here in our, to the left of his little box and the right of his box, he's got the red square on the right there. That's a bypass with a valve that would open into a bench, and then the return is the not red opening into the bench. And these are a couple, I'm just going to flip through these really quick. What we've got is we've got a few different options. So we've got just sort of an opening into a bench with the return, the entrance and the exit at roughly the same height. You can see the exit's got a little lower threshold right here. You can't, oh yeah, maybe you can see my mouse. A little lower threshold there. And a little higher threshold there. So that's his number 1 design choice. Number 2 is kind of the same thing, but with a tube extending down the bench. Number 3 is the same thing, but with a lowered pickup for the intake for the exit into the chimney. And number 4 would just be putting the chimney on the floor. And so of all these, what the question is kind of what's the best? What are the pros and cons? And this is a really kind of a open-ended question. I think if it were me, Peter, I would go for this simplest design. You can extend this down the bench like this in your other design, and what that'll do is that'll bring the heat down to the far end of the bench and then have it spread out as it comes back. It really kind of depends on the size of your bench and everything else. I don't know that in your design this is necessary. It might be useful. It wouldn't hurt. If it's easy to do, you might try it. But this design, I think, is the simplest. If you move the chimney exit down to the floor like you have here, or even here, I fear that you are going to cool the gases too much, because now you've added the floor to that whole equation of surface area. And I fear you're just going to create too much load on the stove. So I wouldn't do either one of those. This one or this one are roughly identical, and I think either one of these are going to be ideal. Now, you want to make sure, and this is one of the questions that Peter asked later on, you want to make sure that all of these openings are a 6-inch chimney's cross-sectional area at minimum. So that's 29 square inches. So this one back here looks to be too small, but I can't tell for sure. But that is an absolute necessity, and ideally they're going to be a little bit bigger. So I know that you asked that question in just a minute. So we'll get through these slides and we'll get to the questions. So this was the question, is he wants the oven as hot as possible so the entrance to the bench is closed. In other words, can he have it just go through the oven and not through the bench? And yeah, that's absolutely possible, and that's the best way to keep the oven as hot as possible. This is really astute, is the elevation of the oven, the elevation of the bench, these things all are interrelated, and if they're at the same elevation and it's all open passageways between, then the oven will never get any hotter than the bench, and you really won't have an oven at all. So if you want the oven to be able to be hotter than the bench, it needs to be either above the bench entrance and exits, or be able to close off the bench. So this is, I think, a really good plan to have separate bypasses, to be able to leave the oven exposed but close off the bench. Now in this question, this is kind of interesting. He's got the firebox here on the right with the cooktop on top, and then he wants to step down to the oven. And the question is, what are the consequences if I lower the oven ceiling? Besides loss of space and less different temps inside the oven, I assume the oven will be hotter overall. This is a great question, and this is a great design idea that Peter brings to this design. He lowered my original flat top here so that he could bring the ceiling down lower over the oven, and in that way you will get a hotter oven, because you'll have less of a bell around it and you'll have smaller airspace around it to heat. Now you need to make sure, Peter, that you retain sufficient flow all the way around the oven. And again, we're looking for that 29 square inches or 6-inch chimney cross-sectional area in all dimensions. You really don't want to pinch off the top just because you know it can go around the back, because what will happen is it'll prioritize going around the back and it won't send any heat over the top. So these are things you'll want to play with a little bit, but in general, yeah, you can lower that oven ceiling and you can, in effect, bring the oven higher in the oven chamber and make a smaller oven chamber, and all those things should lead to higher potential cook temperatures. So the next question is about the bypass. And here Peter's asking if he can do a bypass like this. This is a nice, simple way to do it with a swinging gate type bypass. And Peter, here's what I'll tell you, is that this will work fine, with the exception of it must open all the way here so you don't make this pinch right here. You see, you've reduced the flow of gases here by so much that this is going to be a choke point. So if this gate bypass can open all the way so it's flush over here, and this distance here remains fully open, then you can do this. But if not, if you can only open at 45 and it's going to pinch off this corner here, then I recommend doing a sliding bypass gate instead, so that you can slide it out of the way. Now the actual opening for the bypass here, he says, is the opening 6.1 inches by 2.1 inches big enough. And in this one spot in the stove, it is okay to break that rule I just told you. It is all right to be smaller than cross-sectional area here in this part of the stove, because we only need some of the gases to go that way, because we're just trying to provide some chimney priming heat right out of the core up into the chimney. So we don't need the full 6-inch chimney, because don't forget, there's still room for the gases to go all the way around the flow of the stove and have that full flow. So we're not restricting the flow of the stove. If we were to close off all the other passageways, then yes, this bypass would need to be 29 square inches. But since it never runs with the rest of the stove closed, in other words, there's always another access for the gases to access the chimney, then this can be reduced size opening. It's the only place in the stove where that's allowed, and it's the only reason it's allowed there is because it's never run as the single chimney exit. So hope that makes sense. Are you guys following me? I don't know if you are. I'm kind of going through some specific stuff, but hopefully the rest of the gang is getting some stuff out of this as well. So the general questions regarding his designs: how do I build entrance and exit from the bench higher than the bench floor? How do I build entrance and exit from the bench? Stove floor is higher than bench floor. Oh yeah, we already talked about that. So that'd be design 2, I think, is the best design. And 7 is it an easier design possible? I don't think so. I think your design 2 is really good and really simple. And then the last question, sorry to ask again, is it really necessary, or can it be less than 6 inches as long as the chimney is 6 inches or more? No, it is absolutely mandatory that all tubes in the system are 6 inches or more. And 6 inches is the absolute minimum, and even that is pushing it. So to just go back over it, I think this really simple design with a bench entrance and exit kind of up here off the floor, with just slightly changed in elevation due to your exit height and your entrance height, I think this is your best bet, Peter. I think that's the simplest way to move forward with this design, and will give you the best performance. Down the road, should you want to make some adjustments, then you can play with your adding tubes to either one of these to extend and lower the entrance or the exit as you see fit. But I don't think you'll want to do that. I don't think they'll be necessary, but you can always do those after the fact. I think your goal at first is to get the stove so that it starts up easy, runs smoothly in all conditions. Then you can start pushing that, bring that exit temperature down and pushing your max efficiency. But you'll find that the stove performance really suffers as you try and push those limits, and everyone's going to have sort of their boundary of what they're happy with in terms of like how difficult it is to start, how often it smokes back, how hard it draws, and how fast it lights up, and how fast it heats the cooktop. Remember that a stove that draws well, lights well, and heats quickly. So if you like want to light your stove and go right to boiling water, you want a stove that doesn't have a lot of restriction or really difficulties drawing hard right out of the gate. So that's my general feeling about all those questions. So I hope that answered your questions, Peter. That was a great email. Thank you for the detailed questions. And with that said, we have one more question. I saved the best for last. That I wanted to go over today. So I didn't lose you guys, did I? I hope everyone's still with me. It looks like it's all working. But maybe someone just drop a hi in chat. I'm just I'm wary now that I've been having so many problems with this stream. Well, we'll see. I'll just move forward. So I got a great email. This is from our dear friend Belgian Gulch. And let's see. Well, I don't know if I'm even talking with you guys. I guess I'll try anyways. So, Mark says he's still with me. Oh, all right, Mark. Thank you for that. I think I'm just running behind. I think it's all lagging behind a little bit. So, I think I said that, and then it took a while to get to you guys. So, Belgian Gulch, you're here. Thank you. All right. Thanks, you guys. I'm glad to hear that you guys are still here. My volume seems low. Okay, well, I'm just going to leave it for now, Belgian Gulch. I don't want to mess with it now, but tell me at the beginning next time, please, and I'll change it. But it seems like I can see it that it's not terribly low, so I'm just going to leave it because I don't want to screw everything up. So this question is from Belgian Gulch. Thanks, Tall Shadow. Gotcha. Appreciate it. Thanks, Permaculture Playground. Okay. So he says, my shop stove stub recently lost its whole Cobra head, leaving only about 3.5-inch open top stub. I noticed several times that coals had fallen over top of the secondary tube. When this happened, I could see no difference in the burn, but I'm sure efficiency fell. With your open pipe secondary air stub, do you ever have coals that fall on and block the secondary air? And so this is a great question. Hey, Davey, welcome. Welcome. Thanks for being here. So this is a great question, and this really goes right back to our secondary air talk of a few weeks ago, Belgian Gulch. And if you'll remember, we were talking about my secondary air design that has just a vertical tube, and Peter's much shorter with the Cobra head. And we were talking about what the difference was, how his ended up like that and mine ended up like that. And what I told you was that when I was burning my stoves with my secondary air piece made out of mild steel, it was only a matter of a month or two of burning before my mild steel stub would burn down to about 3.5 inches high, exactly as high as Peter's Cobra. And guess what? That's as far as it goes. It burns down to that far, and then it stays there, okay? Because that's the hot spot in the combustion chamber. And once it gets down to there, the metal can hang, it can last. So you end up with these secondary air stubs that are secondary air horizontal tubes with a 3.5-inch stub. Peter decided, just like I did a long time ago when I said, hey, what's the point of making the slit in here if this thing's just going to melt anyways? Don't bother making the slit, just burn it till it burns down and then replace it. Well, Peter just said, well, why bother with that? I'll just cut it off to where it burns down to, and I'll just call that its final form. So in other words, what my stubs are burning down to, Peter's just accepting as the usable size. And then he remedies that by putting a cap on it so that coals don't fall in it and basically wreck your burn and destroy the reason why you have your stove in the first place. So, hey, Mark, nice to see you. Glad you're here, man. So, what I said a few weeks ago was that I've now found that material that doesn't go away, the RA330, and I think that my original complete secondary air design of a overall height of 7.5 inches, 6-inch vertical on top of 1.5 inch horizontal, that puts the top of that thing in the right place for A, the most efficient burn, and B, the most effective protection of wood getting into the port, and C, coals falling down on top of it. It's blocked from the top so that wood can't get over the top of it. It blocks the wood from getting in front of the port. It's perfect. It really is. So, no. When you have a full height, proper pre-port tube, you won't get coals blocking it. When you use Peter's Cobra pre-port tube, you also won't get coals blocking it. But if you're anything like me and you burn often and consecutively, a mild steel pre-port tube, even at 3.5 inches tall, eventually that Cobra head isn't going to last very long. It's going to melt off, and then you're going to have an open stub, and you're going to get coals in there. So again, I'm just going to, you guys know, we do this all the time, and I don't mean to say my way or the highway or anything like that. What I'm trying to point out is really this is a learning process, and it's a progression. And we all go through it. And I've been down this road with these secondary air tubes, and my opinion is that I will now prefer to just buy these RA330s full height once, put it in there, and call it good. And barring that, if I can't do that, then I'm usually not going to bother to make a fancy Cobra. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to just start with a 6-inch full-size 2-inch tube and let it burn down to Cobra height. Why go to all that work to weld a Cobra on if you're going to end up with the same thing at the end of the day? I got 3 months of burning the top 3 inches off before I ended up in, cold plug-in territory. So, again, we need to reiterate that we use our stoves differently, Peter and I. So while Peter has a passive house in a modern country with great infrastructure, and he can afford to run his stove once a day because his house is tight as a drum and his calculations are perfect. And so his secondary air tube's longevity is a far less import than mine, where I'm going to burn, 5 loads a day every day. So that's the fundamental reason between those design divergences in ours. I think if Peter and I were together, I think he would agree. Ideally it would just be the full size, full height, but it isn't going to last. So he goes for his that he can build to his specifications, and his will stay that way for a couple seasons. Doesn't work that way for me, or for, in my opinion, most of us who don't live in, brand new passive houses with super high tech seals and well built features. Most of houses in this country are old and crappy, or even worse, new and crappy like mine. So, different types of burning. And so that's just all to say with the secondary air, Tom, does my secondary air stub plug with coal? It doesn't, because it's tall enough. If I build it at a mild steel and it burns down to the lower height, then yes, it does. And that's why I ended up just saying, I think for me, my choice is the full size stub. So hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully that makes some sense. I'm just really a big fan of that full one. I don't really see much point in going through the trouble of the lower Cobra, unless you're in a situation like Peter, where you're going to kind of like try to make it stay together, try to make it last. But if you're like me and you're just going to burn the thing hot and damn the torpedoes, it's going to melt down, then you might as well start with it tall. It's better that way, and let it burn down to its compromised position, as it were. That's my opinion. I hope that answers your question. I hope that wasn't. I hope that didn't come off as negative. It wasn't meant to be. It was hopefully a description of sort of like how we sort of wound our way down this road, and why we have ended up with different opinions of what we prefer, Peter and I. But hopefully, those all kind of come together with the same sort of logic and reason behind them as to why that all works out that way. So there's that. And with that, I think that's enough for today. I am actually really surprised that I pulled out of that fiasco of a beginning and we made it this far. So we should probably call it good. And you guys, thank you so much for coming back. I really, really, really was missing this time we spend every Wednesday, so I'm so glad to pick it back up again. We'll definitely run this out for a few months here and into the spring. So send me your questions, send me your emails, send me your build photos. We'll do this. We got some weeks to go, so let's generate some content and some conversation, and keep moving this thing forward. I think we're really making some headway. So all right, you guys, thanks so much for all your support and comments and for being here. I'm going to hit the outgoing video, and I'll see you guys. We'll do this again next week, next Wednesday. All right, you guys, have an awesome week. See ya.